A blind veteran was turned away at a bar, treated like he didn't matter. The next day, his old Navy SEAL team showed up. They didn't say a single word, but no one ever forgot what they did. It was a Friday night in Beaufort, North Carolina, a coastal town where everyone knows someone who served. The neon signs buzzed faintly in the salt-heavy air, and laughter spilled out onto the sidewalks from local bars. Jake Turner, a man who had once seen the worst of war and walked through fire for his country, now moved cautiously along the pavement with his cane tapping in front of him. His eyes, clouded from combat injuries sustained over a decade ago, no longer saw the ocean, but he remembered its sound. That night, he just wanted a beer, and maybe a small taste of normal. The bar wasn't fancy, but it used to be welcoming. Jake had been there before, back when the old owner knew his name and always made room for him. But that night, everything had changed. A new manager, a colder atmosphere. As Jake stepped through the door, the conversations died down. The man behind the bar gave him a once-over and said, flatly, "We're full tonight." There were clearly empty tables. Jake stood frozen for a moment, unsure if he'd misheard. He hadn't. No explanation, no apology, just a firm dismissal, like he was a burden no one wanted to carry. No one intervened, no one looked him in the eye. And Jake, proud, quiet Jake, simply turned around and left, his cane tapping like a metronome of humiliation across the wooden floor. What no one knew was that Jake still had brothers who didn't need to speak to make their message heard. And they were already on their way. Jake Turner had learned long ago how to read a room without needing to see it. The air shifts, the tension tightens, people grow quiet in the wrong ways. As he stepped into the Dock House, the bar where he used to share stories and slow sips of bourbon with old neighbors, the change was immediate. Conversations stalled. The faint clink of glasses seemed to echo louder than usual. Something was off. He paused just inside the doorway, holding his cane firmly. "Evening," he said, his voice calm but unmistakably ex-military, precise, measured, steady. Behind the bar stood a man Jake didn't recognize. Mid-30s, button-down shirt, too crisp for a beach town. The kind of guy who probably had a spreadsheet for drink specials. He gave Jake a once-over and didn't bother hiding his disapproval. "We're full tonight," the man said. Not rude, not aggressive, just final. Jake tilted his head, confused. "That right, I can hear 6 empty chairs, 3 to my left, 2 near the window, 1 behind the jukebox." Someone in the corner let out a nervous chuckle. The bartender's lips thinned. "I said we're full." Jake didn't argue. He didn't ask for pity or push his way in. That wasn't who he was. He just stood there, quiet. A retired Navy SEAL who'd spent most of his adult life navigating war zones could certainly handle rejection. But this wasn't rejection. This was erasure. He turned slowly, letting the tip of his cane guide him back toward the door. The air outside was cooler now, or maybe it just felt that way. As the door shut behind him, a waitress leaned toward the bartender and whispered, "You know who that was, right?" He shrugged. Does it matter? It did. And by morning, he'd wish more than anything that he'd listened. Jake's apartment sat above an old bait shop, the kind that still smelled faintly of brine and sun-warmed wood. He liked it that way. It reminded him of before the surgeries, before the medals, before the silence that had come to define his days. He sat in his favorite chair, worn leather creaking beneath him, and listened to the world outside. Seagulls argued overhead. A boat engine groaned somewhere in the marina. His fingers traced the edge of a small photo frame on the end table. It held a picture he couldn't see anymore but remembered perfectly. His SEAL team in Fallujah, arms slung over one another's shoulders, eyes sunburned and tired, but smiling like hell. It wasn't the bar that had hurt him. Not exactly. Jake had known cold shoulders and misplaced judgments long before losing his sight. What stung was the way it happened. Quiet, clinical, like being erased in front of people who knew better. Civilians didn't always get it, but this was a military town. Some of those folks in the bar had probably waved at him in parades. He didn't cry, not Jake, but the ache settled in a deep, familiar place, one that painkillers and time couldn't reach. He could still remember crawling through enemy tunnels, navigating minefields by instinct and breath. He had never asked to be thanked. He just never expected to be dismissed like furniture either. That night, as he poured a shot of the cheap bourbon he saved for bad days, a message buzzed on his phone. A simple vibration. He couldn't read it, but the phone read it aloud for him. It was from Ethan Price, former sniper, Team 6. Heard what happened, sit tight. Jake's hands stopped midair. He hadn't spoken to Ethan in 2 years. He hadn't told anyone what happened at the bar. But somehow, they knew, and something had just shifted. 3 states away, in a cabin tucked into the Blue Ridge foothills, Ethan Price stood barefoot in his kitchen, eyes locked on his phone screen. The video had come in grainy, shot from across the bar, shaky hands, poor lighting, but the sound was unmistakable. Jake's voice, calm, steady, then the cold response, "We're full tonight," and the hollow tap of the cane as he turned to leave. Ethan didn't need the rest of the clip. He didn't need the commentary from the person who sent it either. He closed the video, opened his contact list, and tapped 5 names. No group chat, no emojis, just a message sent individually. Dockhouse, tomorrow, 0700. No explanation, no further instruction. None was needed. Within minutes, responses came in like clockwork. Copy en route. Got it. On my way. What happened? That last one from Travis, the team medic. Always a bit more empathetic. Ethan didn't answer that one. He didn't need to. By morning, they'd all see for themselves. Across the country, in garages, kitchens, and quiet living rooms, former Navy SEALs began packing. Not weapons, this wasn't that kind of mission, but the kind of gear only brothers in arms understand. Boots broken in by years of wear, dog tags tucked beneath shirts, a coin or patch from a fallen comrade. They wouldn't need words. In the silence between them, there was a language no one else could hear. Meanwhile, Jake sat alone in Beaufort, completely unaware that 5 men were already in motion. Men who would drop everything, drive through the night, and walk into a bar without saying a single word, because one of their own had been dishonored, and silence would speak louder than anything. The hum of tires on asphalt had a rhythm to it, almost like a drumbeat of something about to unfold. One by one, they rolled into Beaufort. No convoy, no fanfare, just separate arrivals, as quiet and deliberate as the men themselves. Ethan arrived first, parking 2 blocks from the bar. He didn't want to be seen, not yet. He stepped out, adjusted his jacket, and looked down the quiet street like a scout returning to familiar ground. He hadn't walked these sidewalks in years, but his boots remembered. Next came Darius, hulking and broad-shouldered, once the breacher of their team. Then Lucas, Leanne, and Sharbide, who used to move through buildings like wind. Travis and Noah followed close behind. They didn't say much to each other. They didn't need to. They met at a diner across from the marina neutral ground. Orders were simple. Coffee, black. No one asked why they were there. The waitress, a silver-haired woman with soft eyes, took one look at their faces and gave a small, respectful nod. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Ethan laid a phone on the table, screen cracked, video queued up. They watched it in silence. Again, no commentary. Jake's voice, the dismissal, the silence, the tap of the cane. Lucas's jaw clenched. Unacceptable, he muttered, the only words spoken. Ethan nodded slowly. Tomorrow morning, opening time, we walk in. Darius asked, do we say anything? Ethan looked at each of them in turn. No, not one word. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about starting trouble. It was about making sure that silence, that cruel, cutting silence Jake had walked out into, never happened again. They paid their bill in cash, tipped generously, and went their separate ways for the night. And somewhere above town, Jake sat alone, unaware that the very fabric of brotherhood was pulling itself back together, just for him. Morning came quietly over Beaufort, draping the harbor in a soft golden haze. The town was just beginning to stir, fishermen hauling gear, joggers tracing the waterfront, and the dockhouse's staff unlocking the door for another routine day. But this day would be anything but routine. At exactly 6:58 a.m., a black pickup truck rolled into the gravel lot beside the bar, then another, then 3 more. They didn't park together, just scattered around the area like shadows with purpose. The engines cut off, doors opened. One by one, they stepped out. No uniforms, no patches, just jeans, boots, and eyes that had seen too much to be fazed by a small-town bar. Ethan adjusted the collar of his flannel and glanced at the others. Number, head nods, no instructions. They already knew. At 7 o'clock on the dot, they walked, not rushed, not slow, just steady, the kind of walk that comes from years of coordinated entry. Customers watched from across the street. A man walking his dog stopped mid-stride, sensing something different. The front door creaked open. The same manager from the night before stood behind the counter, sipping coffee, scrolling through his phone. He looked up and froze. 5 men, silent, motionless, staring. The room, still half empty, fell into an eerie hush. The bartender instinctively straightened up. Morning, fellas, he offered. Uncertain no one answered. Ethan stepped forward, stopping just short of the bar. He didn't make a scene. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked, not at the bartender, but around the room, taking it in, absorbing the space. Lucas pulled out a stool and sat. Then Darius. The others followed. No one ordered drinks. No one spoke. But somehow, the air had changed. It was clear they weren't leaving anytime soon. And across town, a 6th man stirred in his apartment, unaware that his brothers had already reclaimed the space he was once denied. The new manager of the dockhouse prided himself on control, smooth playlists, spotless counters, predictable clientele. The moment those 5 men walked in, that sense of control began to slip quietly, but completely. They didn't fit the usual mold. No casual small talk, no nervous energy, just calm, deliberate presence, like a storm waiting offshore, unmoving but undeniable. He cleared his throat and stepped around the bar, putting on the sort of fake grin used for smoothing over complaints. Gentlemen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're not open for another 15 minutes. Ethan didn't blink. Darius shifted slightly on his stool, resting one boot against the bar rail. The manager's grin wavered. I said, he continued, firmer now. We're not. Travis turned, slow and intentional, locking eyes with the man. He didn't speak, he just looked at him. No anger, no threat, just weight, the weight of history, pain, and an unspoken promise. You don't do that to one of ours. The silence stretched so long, it felt like a conversation in itself. Customers started drifting in, 2 older veterans in worn hats, younger couple holding hands. One by one, they paused at the door, caught in the tension. Then they walked in, anyway, drawn by something they couldn't quite name. One of the regulars whispered to the bartender, "Aren't those guys Navy?" He didn't answer. He just kept drying the same glass. The manager, sensing something shift outside his control, backed off slowly, returning behind the counter without another word. No one told him to go. He just understood. The 5 SEALs sat there for over an hour. No drinks, no demands, just watching, breathing, existing, and every minute, their presence made one thing blazingly clear. Jake Turner mattered. When they finally stood to leave, they did so in perfect sync, like a drill long practiced. Not a word spoken, but the silence they left behind echoed louder than any fight ever could. By lunchtime, word had spread through Beaufort like a sea breeze before a storm. No one knew the full story, but everyone was talking. 5 men, serious, silent, unmistakably military, had shown up at the dockhouse and sat like sentinels, not speaking, not drinking, just existing with a purpose. No one dared question. And just like that, the bar began to shift. That afternoon, 3 Vietnam veterans who hadn't stepped foot in the place for years walked in, hats tilted low, shoulders stiff but proud. No one stopped them. No one would have dared. A Gold Star mother came in next, holding a folded flag against her chest like it still carried the weight of her son. She didn't order a drink. She just stood near the back, nodding once at the bartender. It was subtle. No declarations, no social media kafta, just presence, the kind that spoke volumes. Jake, unaware of the ripple he'd caused, finally ventured outside late that day. He'd felt something in the air, a change he couldn't explain. Maybe it was the warmth in the greetings he got on the street, or the sudden quiet when he passed the dockhouse again. This time hearing familiar voices inside, voices that once would have stood with him on foreign soil. He didn't step inside, not yet, but he paused on the sidewalk, listening. He heard laughter, familiar barstool creaks. Someone was playing a slow country tune on the jukebox, the kind they used to sing quietly under desert stars. His hand tightened around his cane. Back inside, the manager watched the day unfold like a slow implosion. More veterans, more respect, fewer of the usual rowdy crowd. He could feel control slipping through his fingers when one of the older vets approached the bar and quietly asked, "What you did to Jake? You fixing it?" The manager didn't answer. He didn't need to, because this wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about a town remembering who it was. The next morning, Jake didn't need a ride. He walked. It took him a little longer now. Every step was calculated, every curb familiar. His cane tapped gently along the sidewalk, echoing faintly in the quiet morning air. He wore a clean navy blue jacket, his ribbons tucked neatly inside, not for show, but because they still mattered to him. When he reached the dockhouse, he stopped. There was no crowd, no fanfare, just a few familiar trucks parked nearby. And, inside, he could already sense it, the shift, the weight in the air. He opened the door. It was almost identical to how it had been days earlier, stools aligned, TVs humming with morning sports, the faint scent of bacon and beer. But this time, no one looked away. The 5 SEALs were already there, seated like they never left. Ethan stood when Jake entered. Not fast, not dramatic, just respectful. The others followed. Jake didn't speak. He didn't have to. They gave him a seat, the same one he used to sit in back when the old owner was still around. The bartender, not the manager. Just a younger guy with uncertain eyes, walked over. "Coffee, Mr. Turner." Jake nodded once. "Please." A pause. Then the kid added, "On the house." Jake smiled faintly. "Didn't ask for that." "I know," the kid said. Still, there were no speeches. No justice monologues. Just 5 men sitting beside their brother, shoulder to shoulder, saying everything without saying anything. Customers filtered in. Some greeted Jake by name. Others offered quiet nods. Even those who didn't know the full story could feel it, the gravity of respect being restored. The manager didn't show that day. In fact, he wouldn't show again, and for the first time in a long while, Jake didn't feel like a ghost in his own town. He felt ... seen ... weeks passed. But the memory of that morning never left Beaufort. The dockhouse didn't advertise what happened, no press releases, no dramatic social media posts. But something fundamental had shifted. Veterans once scattered and unseen began to return, like pieces of driftwood pulled back to shore. The regulars noticed, the town noticed, and Jake, he noticed most of all. He started coming back every Saturday. Same table, same black coffee. Ethan would join sometimes, so would the others, rotating in and out like an unspoken watch. No one made a scene. That wasn't their style. But then, one morning, Jake found something new by the entrance. A small bronze plaque, set into the wooden beam by the door. No lights pointed at it. No dedication ceremony. Just these words, etched with care. "All who served are welcome here." Jake ran his fingers across the raised lettering. For a long time, he stood there, the early sun casting shadows over his face. He didn't smile, not fully, but something in his expression softened. Inside, the same young bartender met him with a nod. "Got your seat ready, sir." The seat wasn't just his anymore. It was a symbol, a silent statement, and the silence, that cutting, bitter silence from days ago, had been replaced with something entirely different. A quiet reverence. The manager. No one quite knew what happened to him. Rumor had it he moved out of state. No one asked where. Jake never pressed charges, never raised a complaint. His answer came in the form of brothers who showed up without being asked, who sat beside him in silence and rewrote the story not with anger, but with presence. Some stories don't need noise to be remembered. This one would echo for years. If this story moved you, don't leave without sharing your voice. Where are you watching from? What part of the story touched you the most? Tap that subscribe button and help us honor the quiet heroes among us. Your comment could be the comfort someone else needs today.